Bring social workers into homes of parents to help them deal with how to raise their children. It's not that they don't want to help. They don't know quite what to do. Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night, the phone. Make sure the kids hear words. A kid coming from a very poor school, or a very poor background, will hear 4 million words fewer. Know these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
So what does that indicate? I mean, that seems to me to be almost definitive.
Yeah, that was a very striking one. You know, that's the classic, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And of course it continues that all men are created equal, but he could not remember the words.
The thing, he said the thing.
So he said, you know the thing. And that was a classic example of difficulty with both memory and language. He was unable to complete the sentence, the thought. And again, if it had been a rare event, I'd say, okay, whatever the circumstances, under pressure. But this was of a piece of repeated difficulties in finding words, finding language, halting speech, stopping himself in the middle of a sentence, and just giving up, basically.
For a racehorse, why in God's name couldn't we provide a $8,000 tax credit for everybody who has child care costs? It would put 720 million women back in the workforce. It would increase the GDP, to sound like a wonk here, by about 0.8%. It would grow the economy.
Right. On one occasion, he actually criticized Bernie Sanders about something with the gun registry, and he said that 150 million people were killed since 2007, so which means that half of the United States was killed, which of course is ridiculous. And then, as you mentioned, and another time, he was talking about a child support for children who go to daycare to make it easy for women to go to work, and he commented that 720 million women could be put back in the workforce. 720 million. That's more than twice the number of people in the United States. And he's saying 720 million women. And again, these are again examples of repetitive errors into either comprehension of numbers or the ability to use numbers, which of course is a very important part of being the president of the United States.
We're now at a stage, just in the numbers that we've gone through just a handful of the examples. It almost seems to happen regularly. There's also the situation where he got confused about the first African-American senator. Carol Braun was the first African-American senator. She was elected, I believe, in 92, 93 in that area from Illinois.
Correct.
Well, I'm looking forward to appointing the first African-American woman to the United States Senate.
But then tell us about that.
Yeah, well, in speaking to a group, he said he appointed the first African-American woman to the Senate, when, of course, senators are elected, not appointed. And he did not do any such thing. And he then forgot later on when he was speaking at a debate that he was talking about the only African-American woman in the Senate. And he neglected the fact that Kamala Harris, who of course is now his running mate, was there by his side, who was another African-American woman in the Senate. He forgot that she was also in the Senate, because he kept saying the only African-American woman, meaning Carol Braun. So clearly and then he tried to correct himself, saying that he was talking about the first. But clearly he made an error. Even at that debate, Cory Booker corrected him. Of course, Kamala Harris corrected him. And it clearly was a situation where it was embarrassing, where he was talking about either appointing a senator, which of course does not happen, or he was talking about the only African-American woman, and clearly Kamala Harris is another African-American woman who was in the Senate, who now, strangely enough, is his running mate.
How would you logically locate that in the analysis of dementia?
Right. So again, it has to do with language, because his use of the word appoint instead of being perhaps saying sharing the Senate with an African-American woman, he could have said that. You know, we were senators together, but instead he had the idea that he was appointing her. So there was some aspect of him having some power that he doesn't have. And the other point being is neglecting the simple facts that there was an African-American woman, Carol Braun, who was elected in 1993, as you mentioned. And then later, Kamala Harris was an African-American woman. And she was by his side in the debate, and yet he neglected that simple fact. Again, cringeworthy moments. Nobody takes any delight in his failures, but it's certainly a sign of a cognitive problem. And anyone who tries to ignore it is just, unfortunately, fooling himself or herself and the American people.
Then there's the last issue that you mentioned, which is behavioral issues, sort of aggressive or inappropriate behavior. And I think the two that jumped out at you or jump out at me certainly is the one about the doggy soldier, the woman he got very angry at, the young teenage woman that he got very, very angry at for seemed to be no reason.
And why should the voters believe that you can win the national election?
It's a good question. Number one, I was a Democratic caucus. You ever been to a caucus? No, you haven't. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. You said you were, but now you got to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you.
And how would you describe that?
Well, this young woman asked him a question, and instead of answering the question in a relatively calm manner, she was a teenager. He started becoming very aggressive towards her and called her a lying dog pony soldier, which I'm not even quite sure what that term means. But
I don't know what that means either. It's like corn pop.
Yeah, it must be some sort of reference that he has. But, and again, that, by the way, that's something that often people do when they're in the beginnings or even in the throes of dementia. They go to phrases that they've used in the past and they use them in inappropriate ways, but it's something for them to keep language going. And unfortunately, Joe Biden has done that repeatedly, where he will just talk gibberish and just keep his language going. So in this case, though, he got very angry at her and was calling her this and was aggressive. And in fact, he's repeated some of that aggressive behavior more recently when he was answering an African-American journalist who asked him about whether or not he was going to be cognitively tested. He got very angry and started shouting at him that, what are you, a junkie? Or you think I use cocaine or something of that nature, where he started to channel his frustration and his anger towards the person questioning him, which again is not uncommon in individuals who have a dementia. And those behavioral issues sometimes are more serious and significant than the cognitive issues.
Have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say?
The last one that I wanted to play for you is this comment about this adversary of his named Corn Pop, who he had some battle with, but then he connects it to children in a pool touching the hair of his legs. So let's play that.
And Corn Pop was a bad dude, and he ran a bunch of bad boys. And I did, and back in those days, to show how things have changed, one of the things you had to use, if you used pomade in your hair, you had to wear a bathing cap. And so he was up on the board, wouldn't listen to me. I said, hey, Esther, you, off the board, or I'll come up and drag you off. Well, he came off, and he said, I'll meet you outside. My car, these were all public housing behind it. And by the way, I sit on the stand, and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Doctor, I have to say about that, something not very scientific, but it seems very creepy, that whole conversation about the legs. And when you consider all that footage we've seen of him touching little girls and sniffing their hair and putting his arm on women who appear to be very nervous when he does it, what's that all about?
Yeah, so you're right. It is creepy, and it's very strange. And I'm not sure what the reference to Corn Pop was, somebody obviously in his past, but clearly when somebody has a dementia or cognitive impairment, there is a loss of some socially appropriate behavior because there's a loss of inhibitions. All of us have inhibitions of our behavior from the frontal lobes. And as we get dementia, and it happens even as we age normally, but certainly as we get dementia, there's a loss of that frontal lobe inhibition, and we can do things that are socially inappropriate. And unfortunately, Vice President Biden has shown sniffing women's hair, touching them inappropriately, things that are not socially appropriate, certainly not for someone in the public eye. And then that conversation about children rubbing the hair on his legs, it was, as you said, creepy and wacky, and does seem to indicate there is some loss of frontal lobe function, which would normally give you that inhibition of this kind of socially inappropriate behavior.